Well, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, I guess, depending on where you actually are. And thanks for joining us today for our second session in the Kentico Azure Virtual Conference. This is a great opportunity, we hope, for people to actually be able to learn about Windows Azure and kind of understand cloud-based computing. My name is Tom Robbins, and I am kind of the host for today, along with some fantastic presenters who are going to provide you some great information. If you've had a chance to attend our first session this morning, Vince Mayfield from BitWizards, the CEO of BitWizards, provided a great overview of what it looks like in the cloud environment and why cloud is important. So we started with what we think is a great grounding. Now we're going to start getting into the development angles of this. And joining me for this session is Brian McKeiver, who's a Kentico MVP and also the partner and senior developer for BizStream. And BizStream is a Kentico Gold partner who's got lots of experience with Kentico and lots of development experience as well. And Brian is going to jump into setting up the basics of Windows Azure development. Hopefully you'll go ahead and stay with us through the day as we've got another set of 5 or so sessions that are coming after this, including myself as the next presenter, where we're going to look at getting your local environment set up. So I'm sure everyone's here to really hear from Brian. So Brian McKeiver, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. You there?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much, Tom. So welcome, everyone, and thank you, Tom, for that introduction, and thank you, Vince, for a great first session. It was a really great overview of what Azure brings to the table as far as cloud offerings go. My job today is to take you your first step of the journey from the point of view of a developer who hasn't really installed all of the different components of Azure or getting the management portal ready. So I'm going to talk about high-level concepts at the very beginning of my presentation. We're going to talk about things like the compute engines, storage accounts, how to set it up, and how to get it going from the very beginning of the process. From there, we're going to move on and talk about how to set up Visual Studio. But before I get into too many details, let me go through to the agenda a second here. Like Tom mentioned, this is our second session of the day. There's all these great sessions afterwards, and I know Brian and Dominic personally, they're going to do a really great job, so I really recommend sticking around to see the rest of the sessions after my talk here. So as you can see, lots of different choices for the rest of the day. But let me get started with my stuff. Like I said, I've got a couple goals for the presentation today. We're going to dig a little deeper into some of the topics that Vince started out on. He talked a lot about infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. These goals here are going to take it one level deeper. We're going to talk specifically about what compute means, what storage means, and what roles are and how to use them. From there, we're going to talk about how to enable your machine, specifically Visual Studio, your IDE, to have all the right tools, SDKs, and frameworks and add-ons that you need. I'm hopefully going to give a few tips out of some add-ons that you might not know about if you haven't done a lot of Azure development. And from there, we're going to build an example Azure app. It's going to be really simple, and then we're going to deploy it. So we're going to try to give you the picture of, hey, it's my first day with Azure. Where should I start? What do I need to do? So those will be the goals for the presentation. So the first topic that I'm going to talk about is Windows Azure Compute. You know, it's one of the 5 main parts of the cloud computing service, and it makes up the brains or the engine that runs everything. Most of the time, people are going to think of Azure as platform as a service because that's where it started. Way back when Azure was first released, you could deploy your application to it, and you didn't have to worry about what IIS was doing behind the scenes, how much disk space was being used. Your job was to write the code and deploy it in a way that it would work. So they've expanded that over the last year to include more than just the application. Like Vince mentioned earlier, you can actually use the infrastructure as a service offering to spawn and host your own virtual machines and scale on demand. And of course, the benefit of cloud computing is the fact that you're only going to pay for these services as you need them, and they will be scalable to meet your needs. There's a couple other compute aspects that may be new to some people, so I'll touch on them really briefly here. Like I said, we started with websites, then we added virtual machines, but there's also this concept of services. So a cloud service is really what it says. It's a service that's running in the background that you can toss information to it. You can have it run processes and algorithms. You can have it talk to your storage. Really, it's a way to think of almost like a web service that you would traditionally develop in Visual Studio as a WCF service, but really it's more hosted in the Azure environment. So you only have to, again, you're only worrying about the application code. You're not really worrying too much about what's running underneath it. So compute, it's pretty much the brain. It's kind of where you start from hosting a virtual machine or hosting your app. You don't have to worry too much about running any configuration behind the scenes or worrying about hardware. It's an abstract layer where you can just get your stuff to run. It's pretty neat. So the next topic or portion of Azure that you need to know about as a developer is really the storage concept. So while compute handles running the application that you create, storage, of course, handles storing the data that you're going to serve. And that can be broken up into different collections. Basically, the SQL management of the SQL database is stored in your Azure storage account. It's held for blobs, tables, and virtual machines. Those are the main components of storage. But really, if you've used other services like Amazon S3 or a content delivery network, you can think of it as a spot up in the cloud to hold your files, whether it's a SQL file, a picture file, a media file, or an entire VHD of a virtual machine. And it's really very high performance. Any request you make to storage is served through a content delivery network if you so choose to do. It scales. It's synced across the world if you choose to do that, of course, so it keeps your performance nice and fast. If you have a very large image, it's a great place to offload your website assets or your web application assets from a storage standpoint as opposed to having it just on-premise on your local server. So really the storage aspect of it is there's a specific way you talk and connect to the storage, of course. With containers and blobs, the names have to be unique, and that's what this graphic at the top right here shows. Basically, the URL structure represents the way you set up your account and the containers and the blobs in there. And it does public storage, if you will, as well as private storage. So when you have a virtual machine in Azure using the infrastructure as a service setup, you can actually have your volumes stored in your storage account, and you can share them across virtual machines or move them from one to another. You can actually even take that storage and use it in your on-premise environment by syncing it down. It's really flexible. It's a great way to store stuff, and it's actually the way you have to store stuff to make applications work in terms of pictures, files, media, all that good stuff. So storage is an important concept to know. We're going to get into a little bit later how to set up storage and create storage accounts in this presentation. But this is at a high level basically what it does. And you can store just about anything in this configuration. So there's Azure Storage. The next concept is really the Azure roles. Roles are probably not originally what you thought they might be when you first read the goal of the presentation, where compute and storage is pretty obvious, right? It's the engine part of what's running. It's the storage of how things are being stored. But roles are maybe not what you think they are at the first onset. Roles are really background processes or your threads in the cloud. They handle activity that you don't necessarily have a UI for, or activity that has to react to file uploads or email requests or services to send out email. And there's really two types of roles. There's a web role and a worker role. From a high level, basically, the web role is very similar to the worker role. However, you get the full-blown IIS capabilities behind a web role. So you can actually have things handled a little bit better for you from like a gzip compression standpoint, or the different settings and abilities in IIS. You can actually do everything that IIS can do, whether that's serving media, serving a file, authentication, all that good stuff. Worker role is more of just a set of code files running at an endpoint. You develop the code, you publish it as a role or cloud service. It serves as an application, but you don't have to worry about any configuration. It's basically, here's a URL that runs this thread, and it's going to do exactly what you have written in the code file. A great example of a worker role in terms of Kentico is actually the Smart Search Indexer. So it's technically a separate project type in your solution. It has a different publishing endpoint, and it can serve as a background thread, just like the Smart Search Index does in Kentico. You know, a traditional Kentico solution that's non-Azure equipped, what Smart Search does is it runs behind the scenes in its own thread, processes your website, and creates a bunch of small index files, and then inserts those into the database to present results. Well, in Azure, you can't really just run your own threads, so much to say. Really, the way Kentico developed the Smart Search Index is to make it a worker role. It's a second project. You attach it to your Azure project, and you publish it as needed. And it kind of runs, and it can talk to your app as it needs. But it's more of a hands-off type of approach as opposed to a full-blown website. So really, there's websites that run on the compute side that have UI and everything that revolves around that, but a worker role is more of just the code running, and you're going to get a result, did it work or not. So roles, again, they're like the threads that you can use to do background processes. So in this slide, basically, we're getting into a little bit of your Visual Studio Client, but I just want to show, because we just talked about it, when you add a role to your project or your solution, there's a little bit different way to do it, and there's one trick, basically, that when you, say, add a new project to an existing solution, the first thing you want to choose is actually Cloud from your tree menu on the left, and then again choose Windows Azure Cloud to pop up the different service options that you can choose. And the screenshot below shows the fact that I've chosen to add a worker role to my project, and there's lots of different options. There's the web role, the service role, a cache role. Again, these all do specific tasks that run in the background of your projects. And one thing to note when you're adding these in the very right-hand portion of the screen, I've actually shown that you can rename the roles, because what happens when you do this in Studio is the name you choose right there is what your assembly name becomes. And if you don't change the name, everything ends up as like my worker role, so it's not the greatest naming convention. So right at the project creation, you can change the name, which is all I was pointing out here. So again, adding roles, not quite the exact as adding a project, but it is a project type that the Azure SDK gives you, and I'll get into that in a second. So to put it all together, as far as high-level concepts go, I really like this slide because it kind of gives you the big picture, but one level deeper than what the introduction was about. The top shows that it really doesn't matter what type of application you're targeting. It could be a mobile device, it could be an HTML5 browser, it could be the Xbox, or an Office add-in, or a SharePoint add-in. At the end of the day, when you use Azure, you're using the entire framework of compute, storage, and roles most of the time. And things can be run through the scaling and on-demand integration layer. You know, you can get your files out of your blob storage through the content delivery network. And I just like how this makes it easy for a developer to see what he has to touch when you need to do certain tasks such as spawn up a VM, have your file being delivered across the content delivery network, or using the cache system in Azure. So pretty neat slide to show you big picture. Okay, so that was sort of my introduction to the topics, or the concepts of the talk. Because what we're going to do next is dive into, like I said, getting you ready from a developer standpoint of what if my boss tells me, hey, we need to spin up an Azure website, what do we need to do? So the next part of the talk is going to be focused around that, and really we're going to center around the management portal. The management portal is a very important tool that Microsoft gives you to control all of your various portions of your Azure services, whether it's a compute portion, a storage, a role, a service, networking, and then of course there's some administrative things like getting your certificates, handling logging, but we'll get into that in a second. But really the management portal of Azure is a web app. It's part of your Microsoft account if you are an MSDN subscriber, and you just need to activate it if you haven't been there yet. And I'm going to show you how to do that really quickly, but really this screen here is showing the fact that the management portal is your developer console to everything. And if anyone's used other competing services such as Rackspace or Amazon, this is the same idea really. It's just the Microsoft version of it. But it's neat because it's one place where you can see everything that you have running, whether it started or stopped. You can actually do some really neat dashboard analytics of your usage of your machines, whether your SQL databases are being used or not, how often requests are happening, whether things are up or down. It's a really neat console and basically your portal to everything Azure. So what do you do if you don't have a management portal set up yet? And I bring this up because right now Microsoft has a pretty neat special running, basically, that if you're an MSDN subscriber and you don't have a management portal or an Azure subscription account, as they call it, you should sign up because they're having a contest that you have a chance to win a free car. If you activate through this link right here I've provided, you basically get entered in the drawing for the car. You actually get $150 in credits, and this is new. This is something that just started probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I just thought it was very timely that we happened to have this Azure Kentico conference and this promotion started. So here's the deal, though. If anyone actually does win the car because they watch this presentation, you have to tell me on Twitter. I just think that would be really neat. But so anyways, hey, chance to win a free car. But the point is, if you have an MSDN subscription, this is a good place to start. You can log into that and get your subscription account started. So really, if you navigate to that link that I just showed you, here's what the screens kind of look like to get started. And the terms are funny if you haven't seen them before, because I've been talking about the management portal and the Azure account, but really it's the subscription account that you start with. So again, if you're an MSDN subscriber and you hit the link, you're going to show a screen just like this. It helps make the subscription go a little bit faster because honestly the main WindowsAzure.com website doesn't have a very great path to initially getting started, especially if you're an MSDN subscriber, which I think most people are at this point. And the other benefit that if you tie these things together, you get some built-in credits that I showed earlier. You get a $150 credit that you can use on any Azure service. It doesn't have to be just the website. It can be SQL. It can be reporting services. It can be the media services. So it's pretty neat, and I would recommend doing it like that if you don't have one yet. So you create your subscription account. One note, when I went to do this, you have to verify your account, of course, just like anything Microsoft. This little screen right here didn't work for me in Google Chrome, so I don't know, must be some Microsoft and Google thing going on there. I had to switch to IE before I could get the verify code button to work, so trying to save you a little time there. It's Microsoft, you might as well use IE, unfortunately, as much as I am not a huge fan of it these days. But so you start here, log into MSDN, create your subscription by hitting the sign up for a free trial, and you're off and running. It does take a second or two before the thing verifies, but From there, you basically get to a nice welcome screen. And again, if you're new to all of this, you want to focus on, once you have your subscription account, you need to then migrate to the portal, because the subscription account is handling your billing information, your address, and all that good stuff, but the portal is where you do all your work. So you create your subscription account, and then click on Management Portal, and it should get you right to the important screen, which is what we're showing you here. So a couple of things about the portal itself. Whenever you want to do anything new, it's at the bottom left, and then this pop-over menu appears from the bottom up. So this is what I'm showing here. I've clicked on New, but on the left bar, behind the dark region in the light blue, is where you can see all of your items that you have assigned and running. There's a number next to each one of them. They're broken out by service. That's fairly obvious, so I'm not going to talk about it. But really the new menu is where you're going to be doing a lot of your work. So what I'm showing here is this is where you actually start to create your first Azure website. So it's a little backwards compared to normal development, where you're usually working in the Visual Studio IDE first. You're running all locally first, and then publishing everything later. Really, this is the place to start for one reason, is that you need a publish settings file that I'm going to talk about a little later to tell Visual Studio where to publish to if you're talking about an Azure website. So my recommendation is to start here, create the placeholder for your app first so that you have that publish setting file, and then it makes it a little bit easier. Of course, after that you can jump back to Visual Studio and do your normal process, but the key concept of this is the fact that don't just think you can keep running in your Visual Studio local environment without doing anything first on the cloud side. So again, here's the portal. This is where you create new stuff, especially websites or virtual machines. So in terms of creating a new website, you have a couple options: quick create, custom create, or from a gallery. The gallery is a really nice feature if you're looking to get up and running very quickly on a pre-built application. And speaking of which, Kentico CMS is actually part of the gallery of Azure websites, so you can actually deploy a version of Kentico really without any source code at all in Azure, which is a pretty neat thing. Or you can actually use the quick create or custom create options to push your own regular MVC website or your own instance of Kentico. I'm going to just show a quick create version here because this is something you might just test out first just to make sure everything is kind of working the right way. So what I've done is I've chosen quick create for a website. You can see I've put in a URL specific to my project as McKeiver.azurewebsites.net. One thing to note, URLs have to be unique. You can't use someone else's AzureWebsites.net URL, so it verifies that right there. And then there's a region choice to let you choose where the site should be hosted from. So again, Azure's across the world. There's data centers all over the place. There's 4 or 5 options to choose in regions. So here's how to create a new website, basically. The next thing about creating different services, again, as we walk through the portals, options would be a data service. The most common use for those ones would be SQL database. And as you can see, you've got a couple options again. Anytime you use Portal, you're always going to have quick create, custom create, and then advanced options for importing existing assets or databases. This is a pretty neat way to get up and running on SQL Server very quickly. From here, you can actually create your own database. You can set some default settings, what collation it uses, what instance, what edition. Again, if you're using a web app, most of the time you can get away with using SQL Web. It's a same powerful engine that SQL Server uses. You just don't have all the analytics capabilities that the full edition has. But it works the same. It works very well. So I tell people usually to use the web edition. Or you can import your own database, of course. If you already have one and you want to just migrate your database to a data service in Azure, you can actually just upload yours right through this management tool as well. So lots of different options. This is just one. But it gives you the idea of how you can move some stuff into your Azure setup. So since we're at this point still talking about the portal, the next important concept before you can actually have, well, let me be careful about how I say that. You can actually have a full working site without a storage account, but most sites will have a storage account to serve their files. So it doesn't hurt to create one because, again, this sets up a credential set that you're going to have to specify to your instance of either an MVC app or Kentico of how you're going to store files. So, you know, if you're following the process on your own work laptop, basically you're going to create your portal account. You might also create your storage account too, because you're going to need both of these eventually anyways. So you click storage on the left menu of the portal, and you have the ability here to create a storage account. It's not brain surgery. There's one twist to it that I thought was relevant. If you choose storage, which I've chosen on the left-hand side, and then create, it's asking you for a URL and a location. Again, the URL has to be unique. Can't reuse names. So I actually tried like 10 different options at the beginning of this to find a storage account name / URL that worked, and it took me the 10th time before it allowed me. So this is being used heavily. And the location, affinity group, that's basically a way to, again, control where it's deployed in the Azure cloud. And one note about affinity groups, basically an affinity group is a way to encapsulate your own common location. So if you had 2 virtual machines on the infrastructure as a service side, and then you also had a Windows Azure website, and you wanted them to share the same storage account or the same data, basically, you could make your own affinity group through the settings option of the portal, and then pick the affinity group here. It's a way to keep everything really close so that the requests and responses are as fast as possible. And then, of course, there's the enable geo-replication, which is if you want it to replicate. That's on by default. But again, this is just the initial creation. You're not having any storage added yet in this step. It's just setting you up so that you can in the future. And I thought this would make sense since you're already in the process of setting up your portal account. So there's a little bit about storage accounts. From there's lots of other options in the portal. I'll talk just about a few more briefly. You can have network settings and network configuration to, again, like Vince mentioned in the very beginning of the presentations, you can actually have a virtual private network between your on-premise network and your Azure Cloud instances. So this is how you would do that. This is where you would go. You'd choose network. You'd add your local networks. And again, this is how you would basically specify your domain, your IP scheme, allow certain network connectivity actions to happen. But to be honest, I'm a software guy. I try not to worry too much about the network side of things. But just know that this is the options of where you would go to do that. So again, you link your cloud instances with your on-premise network through this. As we go through the rest of the portal, I just thought it was also important to mention that there's a pretty powerful diagnostic tool available to you for everything running in your Azure portal. So operation logs is the place to start if you have a problem, if you need to troubleshoot some things, if you want to do extra logging for certain events. You can add to this and extend to it with the API capabilities of Azure. And there's actually a pretty neat add-on. So this is the first tip, really, first add-on I tell people about when we talk about Azure development. There's the Enterprise Library 5.0 pack for Azure. You can download it, and what that does is it gives you easily components that you can reuse and add to your project, so you don't have to worry about, oh, how do I write to the operation log? Well, this library has a spot for you to do it right then and there, basically. And it has some other features too, like how to handle caching, auto scale. It's a pretty neat library, and it's from Microsoft, so you can count on it, and it's used all over the place. And Enterprise Library has been around for a very long time, even in the old ASP.NET 2.0 days. So it's constantly being improved upon by Microsoft. So I recommend it as an add-on to Visual Studio and C# in general. But again, so this settings screen is where you can look at what's going on with your Azure account. You can actually specify other administrators. You can get certificates, different publish setting files, and we'll get into that in a second. But it's pretty neat. So I'm going to take a quick pause, Tom. Have we had any questions from the audience so far on how to use the portal or subscription accounts or anything like that?
Brian, this is Brian. A couple people asked, wasn't there a previous portal as well, and are there any features that are not in the new portal that are in the previous portal that you're aware of?
So good questions. There definitely was a previous edition of the portal. I don't know if I mentioned it or not, but the portal, when it first came out with Azure 1, it was not great. They did a heavy update to it, I want to say in spring of this year, maybe a few months ago, where they added features to it. Everything that you could do before, I believe they ported over. Maybe you could help me a little bit with that answer, Brian. But I believe all they did was add new features to it. They didn't remove any features. Is that right?
Correct. What they did was the previous portal was Silverlight based, and it was okay. It's kind of the first incarnation of the portal and the functionality. Then what they did was they created a second portal, which was called so eloquently the new portal, and that is all HTML5 driven, and it's much faster and it's much more responsive. Now, since that time, both portals have existed side by side, and most of the things that were in the previous portal were being ported to the new portal. However, there are still a couple of features that are still in the previous portal that they have not yet brought over, things like some aspects of the traffic manager and some of the service bus aspects, but they are continuing to build out the new portal, and when everything is over there, then the previous portal will then be discontinued, and it's a much better experience because it's all HTML driven and no Silverlight and what have you. So.
Right. Yeah, that's a great answer, and thanks for that, Brian. The new version, the HTML5 version, the one I've been showing you guys today, it's really slick. It moves fast. It works on every browser. The Microsoft sign-up thing doesn't, of course, but the portal actually does, and it's really nice to use. It's responsive, all that good stuff. So. Thanks,
and one other quick point to add to that, and someone kind of wrote in on this, is you can actually, the portal itself, everything in Azure, just about everything is REST-based, so it has all these web services behind the scenes that you can interact with, and there are third-party companies that are developing portals to interact with Windows Azure as well, and just sending PowerShell commands and API calls to the service itself to kind of interact with your Windows Azure experience and the resources you have available to you as well. So it's a very open architecture in that way, and that I guess if you just don't want to use the portal, you could write your own if you have that much time on your hands.
Yep. Very good. Oops. Never fails, Adobe Updater. Okay. We'll keep moving on then. So that was my overview of the Azure portal, basically. Again, it's where you set everything up. It's where you can monitor what's going on, see what's being used and what isn't. That's where you basically start the process. The next step of what I want to show you guys today is really the configuration of Visual Studio on your local machine. So now that we have a place to publish to, we have our account set up, we have our storage account created, we're going to move into what do you do with Visual Studio. And everything I'm going to show you assumes you have a basic level of Visual Studio 2012. Update 2 is what I really recommend. And if you don't have Update 2, here's a link to it. We really recommend getting to Update 2 in Visual Studio 2012 because there was a pretty nasty bug in some editions of Studio that when you went to save a file, it would actually pause for a couple seconds. And it was really annoying. I can't tell you how many developers I talked to that had this happen to them. And hopefully it hasn't happened to you, but if it did, know that Update 2 fixes that critical bug. Here's the link to go get it. There's also some other performance improvements and additions to the tools that come with Update 2 that make it totally worth it. And again, it's totally free, so why not? And again, everything I am going to show you going forward, you can do with Visual Studio 2012. Thought it was worth noting, but seriously, it is 2013. why not upgrade if you can't? There's all sorts of backwards compatibility support with 2012, and believe me, at BizStream we work on projects that were started in Visual Studio 2005 sometimes, all the way across. So I know having multiple versions happens sometimes, but if you can use 2012, you might as well, because it's got the best support for developing with Windows Azure. So again, assuming you have a basic update level of Studio, all the screens going forward should be the same for you once you install the different tools that I'm going to talk about. So the Azure SDK, now that's really the main component that you need on your local machine if you're going to start working with Windows Azure, whether it's a plain Azure site or Kentico. The 2.0 version of the SDK was released in May of this year. It has a whole set of new project templates that work well with the new portal. It basically gives you all of the different project types that you need to work with Azure. And if you don't have it, you're going to get a lot of pop-up messages that say, hey, I don't know what this project type means, sorry. And you're not going to have any other ability other than to close what you just tried to open. So step one, step one is update your Visual Studio. Step two is download the Azure SDK. You have two choices to get it, and really the main website has it at this link right here. But I want to talk a little bit about the web platform installer as a second option, because I think it's a better option than just downloading the one Azure SDK from the Azure site. And the reason I say that is that the platform installer has the whole suite of application downloads for Visual Studio, for SQL Server Management Studio, NuGet Package Manager, different third-party frameworks and open source projects that you can add into your environment. And that platform installer, it looks like this. It's a program that you download on your computer first, and then it scans your computer to see what's installed from the Microsoft Development Technology Stack and what isn't. And of course, the Azure SDK 2.0 is one of the main downloads. You know, as we've seen in the last 2 years, Microsoft has really put a importance level or priority of Windows Azure development. So they even have a Windows Azure section of the platform installer now. That was kind of added on in this new version. You can search by category, you know, for a server, a framework, or a tool, or a Windows Azure component. And this is where you can go to get it. So once you add it, you can actually install multiple packages if you don't have them, or tools. But really, we're focusing today on just adding the Azure SDK 2. So what it does is it actually tells you what prerequisites are installed on your machine or what aren't, and it gives you a nice link to see everything. It gives you a really great ability to install all of the projects in the right order, and that's, again, why I like this tool, because it takes any question out of your mind about which order you should install certain aspects of .NET development in. And if you're like me, if you've ever had any problems with Studio not working or .NET beta products not working, you know that uninstalling them is a pain sometimes. This tool makes that pain go away. It actually has nice rollback ability. It will clean up your machine, and it just works well. Anytime you're going to add components into your .NET framework or your Visual Studio, I really recommend using the web platform installer, and of course that applies to any Azure tools you have as well. So one other note, the last time I did this was on a very clean machine where I had to install the Azure SDK, and it took a while. So at this point, after you click I accept, feel free to go get a cup of coffee or something and come back to your machine, because it's going to take some time to install all the different components. So that's the platform installer. That's how you would get the Azure SDK. The next thing I recommend, after you have the Azure SDK installed and after you've restarted Visual Studio, is using NuGet to get any packages that might be relevant to what you need to do in terms of Azure. So if anyone hasn't used the NuGet Package Manager or doesn't know about it, it's really a great add-on management tool that Visual Studio has. It's right available in the Tools menu. You can go to Package Management Console, right from Tools, I think, is where you get to it. This pops up. It lets you search what's installed on your machine and what's available in the NuGet Marketplace. And this is it may sound similar to the platform installer, but it's a little bit different because the NuGet Package Manager has more of the just third-party development frameworks and tool sets available, whereas the platform installer has purely the Microsoft choices, with one minor exception of the different gallery objects that you can get from the platform installer. But they're kind of similar, but really NuGet is used in more ways from more different people. You can actually, even as an organization, create your own NuGet packages and deploy to your developers that way through it. There's a lot of different options with NuGet, but really, to get back to the Azure discussion, I like this as getting more add-ons to your studio, because it tells you that, for instance, you already have the Windows Azure Storage client library installed on your machine, but there's all these other ones. If you search for Azure, and the most common other one that you're kind of probably run into, depending on your needs, would be the caching library, and this is a great way to go get it. It's basically 2 clicks to just say install and OK, and you'll download the package to your machine, and it will just be there. So NuGet is a really neat tool to use when you need to go get packages or add-ons to any C# project or VB.NET project, .NET project really. So there's the package manager. So that was sort of the basics of what you need. Once you have the Azure SDK, your Visual Studio Client open, you're off and running to create the different Azure project types as you want. The place to start is, of course, new project. If you choose web and ASP.NET MVC4, that's kind of the key point to remember. That's where you actually get to the gateway of creating a new Azure project type. You can choose Internet Application from the new MVC4 project dialog. And this is basically a project template that's predefined by Microsoft that has the correct settings to be deployed to Azure for you. So again, we're going to walk through a Hello World example, and this is the place to start. New projects, MVC4, Internet Application. Once you're there, you'll get a set of the standard MVC4 files, your views, controllers, all that good stuff. I've modified the sample, and I didn't think showing you guys the sample code makes sense at this point. Really, the key is as soon as you say new project, you're going to get everything you need. Hit F5 on your keyboard and make sure it just works. So I've created a Hello Azure as the HTML behind this, and it just should pop right up if you've said new project, and that's the example of that right there. So I've built the project. And really, for today's talk, the more important thing is the Publish Wizard. And again, this is what you get by choosing Internet Application. And what we're doing here, just to back up for 1 second, what we're doing here is we're creating an Azure website. It's what I say is probably the easiest place to start. Let's not run all the way into Kentico. Tom, we'll get to that later, and Dominic and Brian. Really, we're going to just do a really basic example to show you how to publish, because the way we're doing this is similar to what you'll need to do later. But really, from here, it's the build publish, or on your Solution Explorer, it's right-click publish. It should have your solution name, and it opens up the Publish Wizard. So the Publish Wizard is kind of a new and improved aspect of the latest version of .NET 4 and the latest version of the Azure SDK. If you remember, way back when the Publish Wizard first came out with Visual Studio 2010, it wasn't really all that great. But they've done a lot of work in that update too to make this better, and then in terms of make it better as it relates to Azure. So this is a really neat, really easy way, and it can be automated if you need to through like a TFS or MS Build. But basically, you're going to make a publishing profile, and you can save these off and manage these as you need to for your organization. But I'm going to walk you through just the basics of what you need to do to publish the Hello World example that we just showed. And that's going to start with the importing of the profile. So once the Publish Wizard pops up, you're going to choose the Import button. And from there, it's going to ask you, where are we importing this publishing profile from? And if you're new to Azure, this will be blank. And what you're going to want to do is hit the Add Windows Azure Subscription Link button. that will allow you to go download the subscription file from your Azure portal account that we set up at the very beginning of the process. It's going to download it locally, and what that's going to give you is a .publish settings file, and that's an XML configuration file, just like web.config. It has all of your settings, and one important note, which is why I have that little guy with the lock there, or the key. This is pretty sensitive information. It's going to have an encrypted password, but it still is going to have all of your other sensitive information about how you get to your Azure account. So be very careful what you do with this file. You know, you're going to have maybe a few of these if you're a larger organization, or maybe just one. But basically, don't give it out to anyone because they'll have the ability to do whatever they want with your Azure account, really, if they get a hold of that publish settings file. So take care with it. But after you've downloaded it, you can just browse to where the location is. And this shows the result. Once it loads up that XML file, that publish settings file, it's going to fill in your destination server, your username, your password, and it's going to pick the website URL that you chose in step 1 when we set up the portal account. And from here, you just want to validate the connection to make sure it works. So I would recommend hitting the Validate Connection button. It should say it worked. And the last 2 screens in the Publish Wizard really are pretty neat. They allow you to handle building this in release, debug, or maybe another configuration mode that you might have that lets you choose a database connection string in case you have multiple. And the last part of the Publish Wizard revolves around previewing what files are going to be deployed. This is new. I think this is pretty cool. In case you have certain files like .back files or source control artifacts that you don't want to publish, this is a way for you to basically just hide those things by unchecking them. They won't get published out. So if you click Publish, you basically get your sample website running on Azure, and this is pretty much it. I mean, basically, we just went from new project, creating a sample, really simple website, web app, and published it to Azure in just a few clicks. And I think this is a pretty neat advantage over other players in the cloud space where it's not as integrated into Visual Studio. So again, it's all Microsoft technology. It all integrates, and this is one reason we like it. It's one reason why I think Kentico chose Azure as its favorite cloud player. And it's pretty neat. It's pretty simple. So those are the basics, really, of setting up and publishing a site. And since we're here, one quick reminder, I don't care which one you use, but at this point you have your basic project set up. It's named. It's got the settings you need. You should probably check in source control. I don't care which tool or service you use, even though Bitbucket's more of a service. You can use TFS. Just don't use Visual Source Safe because, for God's sakes, it's awful and Microsoft doesn't support it anymore. I recommend getting your stuff into source control. So, you know, what we've learned today, hopefully I've given you a better understanding of what compute, storage, and roles are in the Windows Azure service offering. You know, we talked a little bit about the main engine, where we store things, and what roles are. I attempted to hopefully tell you as best I could about what steps you need to take to get running with Azure, and that can be really summed up as updating Visual Studio, installing the SDK, getting anything from NuGet if you want to, and then we walk through creating a simple Azure site and how to publish it to the cloud. So really these are the basics. I'm trying to set your machine up the correct way so that I can hand it off to Tom Robbins, and he'll tell you then how to use these basics and publish a Kentico site with it. So at this moment, open it up to questions. Brian or Tom, do you know if any more questions came in?
I do have one question. Can I have multiple versions of the SDK installed?
Yes, that's actually a good point. I don't know if Tom was going to go into that or not, but really there's 3 or 4 major versions, 1.7, 1.8, and 2.0. You can have them installed side by side. It doesn't hurt. But know that whatever SDK version you build your project with, that's what you want to keep in mind that other developers will need to have installed in their machines to work with. Because if you build, say, an MVC app with 1.8 and someone else has 2.0, they'll either need to upgrade the project solution to the newest SDK or go install those controls. The older version.
And now, one other point to that too is you can only have one version of the emulator installed for one version of the SDK. But you can have multiple SDKs and multiple Visual Studio tools, but only one emulator. So make sure you're using the emulator. If you're using the emulator, make sure it's the version that you want to use.
Yep.
All right. So one of the other questions that just came in is, what are some common issues that can be encountered when changing a website project to a web application? Any thoughts on that, either Brian or Brian?
Yeah, so when you convert website to web app, if you have a lot of code in the app code directory, there's one sort of automatic thing that's going to happen. And the conversion process is going to compile those classes that were just class files into assemblies, and basically it renames some of the configuration of the folders, and some people don't know what old underscore app code means. That's the result of that conversion. So I've had questions come to me about, well, what is this old app code thing? Where's my app code? How does this work? Basically know that it's more of a compiled deployment type and project type, and your code moved from app code to old underscore app code. And there's things like the designer files that you have to worry about that link up your controls on the front end of the page to the code behind. It's a little bit different. You can't just edit a file that's running as you use and develop a website locally the way you can in the website model. You have to actually stop and start things after you rebuild. So it's a little different to work with, but it's really similar at the end of the day.
Yeah, I would agree. The website versus web app is just an evolution of a project type within Visual Studio, and a long time ago there really was just this the web app, and then they kind of came up with the website project, which allows for rapid development and deployment. However, you're deploying your business logic along with the presentation logic all on your server, which in some instances could be a security concern. So they brought back the web app, and they have the website that kind of exist in parallel. And Kentico, in order to aid rapid development, they originally chose the website project for that reason. And then with the advent of Windows Azure, in Platform as a Service, you have to have a web application. So they provided a number of tutorials on how to convert that, and now the present version of the installer allows you to choose whether you want a website project, a web app project, or a Windows Azure project, which includes a web app project. And as far as issues are, I can tell you if you're going to convert an existing Kentico site from a website to web app, it will take it a little while, but it will go through and process it all. And just kind of be cognizant of any files that you bring in. If you bring them in from maybe an existing web part that's in a website that you already have, and you want to pull those into a web application, make sure you do convert those files that you pulled in as well, so that they get compiled into the single DLL with the rest of the site logic.
Yeah. Now there is an advantage too to wrap that up. The compilation mode in a web app has less on-the-fly compilation it needs to do of all your independent assemblies, the way websites work. So in scalability and performance terms, the application model has a performance advantage because there's less compiling on the fly. So some people like it for that reason too.
And it will build a good bit faster. If you have a web app, it will build a good bit faster than the first time you're building a website project.
Okay, great. Anyone else have any other questions? So, Brian, if somebody wanted to get more information about BizStream, where would they be able to go?
Okay, well, here's the information on the slide. The best place to reach us is support@bizstream.com. That's our email address that we have people watching all the time. And here's my personal contact info. If you have any questions about .NET development or Azure development, I'm happy to help out. Here's our website. Here's my blog where I blog about Kentico. And yeah, thanks a lot, everybody, for attending. And thanks, Tom, for inviting me to present.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Brian. Could you bring up the agenda slide for me real quick?
Sure. Give me a second.
All right. So thanks, everyone, for joining us today. We are in about 30 minutes or so, we'll have our next session, which is actually by me. So Go running Kentico CMS on Windows Azure, where we're going to start getting into how we can actually run Kentico CMS on our local development machine. And then from there, we're going to get into some great presentations by Brian Soltis, and then Dominic Pinter, who's our group product manager for Kentico. And then Brian, again, drilling as we get kind of deeper and deeper and deeper into Kentico and into Azure. So as always, we appreciate any feedback, and we will look forward to hopefully seeing you in about 30 minutes. So thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.